Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to take a stack of sources and really just extract the most important insights for you, giving you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
And today, we're undertaking a deep dive into a concept that I think runs through the entire biblical narrative. It's this powerful, sacred command to practice hospitality.
It really is, and it's a subject that can be so easily misunderstood in our world, isn't it? We have this idea of hospitality being, social entertaining.
Exactly, having friends over for a nice dinner, which is a good thing.
A wonderful thing. But it's not what the Bible is primarily talking about.
Not at all. And so our core mission in this deep dive, using the essay we have in front of us, is to clarify what true biblical hospitality actually means. It's about moving past etiquette and really into ethics, covenantal ethics.
And the source material draws that distinction right from the start. It's not about opening your home to people you already know and like. It's defined as something much more deliberate. This act of opening our homes, our resources, our hearts to strangers, to sojourners and outsiders.
And here's the key phrase: to those who genuinely cannot repay us.
That lack of expected reciprocity, that seems to be the absolute center of it.
It is. It's the key metric. If you look at the original Greek term in the New Testament, philoxenia, it's not complicated. It translates directly as love of strangers.
Love of strangers.
Philo, love, xenia, stranger or guest. It's an intentional love directed toward the unknown, the vulnerable, the person who can offer you nothing in return.
And that gives this simple practice, opening your door, sharing a meal. It gives it this immense spiritual and theological weight. It's highlighted as one of the most practical, one of the most visible expressions of Christian love you can possibly make.
Absolutely. And it's so profound because when you practice it faithfully, it becomes a mirror. It's a reflection of the grace of God himself. Well, we have to remember that we, you listening, me, all of us, we were the strangers. We were the outsiders, even enemies of God. And yet he welcomed us into his household through Christ.
So our welcome of others is just a small reflection of that much greater welcome we first received.
It's mirroring the radical welcome that saved us.
That distinction, moving from just being a good host to being a mirror of God's grace, that sets the stage perfectly for this deep dive.
I think so too.
So we're going to trace this thread. We'll start with the historical necessity, why this command was so critical in the law of Moses. Then we'll walk through Israel's history, see it in action.
And then into the daily life of the New Testament church, where it becomes absolutely central.
Exactly. And the source material makes this sobering connection that we can't overlook. It all culminates, in a sense, in future judgment.
Yes. Christ himself, the ultimate judge, implies that how we've treated the least of these, the stranger, the person in need, is a direct reflection of how we've treated him.
So this is not a side project for the overly generous. It's central to what God expects of his people. In all ages, it's right there in the foundation of the covenant.
That's right. It's foundational.
Okay, so let's start there. Section 1. To really feel the weight of this command, especially when you read it in Leviticus or Deuteronomy, we have to understand the historical and cultural context of the ancient Near East. It's so different from our world.
Staggeringly different.
For us, travel means you book a flight, you get a hotel, it's a consumer transaction. But for an ancient Israelite, why was hospitality literally a matter of survival?
Well, imagine you're a traveler back then. Maybe you're a merchant, a pilgrim on your way to a festival, or even someone fleeing a famine in your own village. The moment you leave your home, you are completely, utterly vulnerable.
In what ways?
Every way. Travel was painfully slow. You're walking, or maybe you have a donkey. It's arduous, and it is filled with danger. We're talking about exposure to the heat, the cold, to wild animals, and most critically, to robbers, brigands who preyed on anyone traveling alone.
So it wasn't just an inconvenience, it was life-threatening.
It was often a matter of life or death, truly.
I hadn't really grasped that severity. The sources point out that the alternatives, like ancient inns, were nothing like our hotels.
Oh, not at all. They were not safe havens. First of all, inns, or khans as they were sometimes called, were rare. You couldn't count on finding one.
And if you did,
they were usually expensive. And, crucially, they often had a reputation for crime, for illicit activity, for immorality. They were places you avoided if you could.
So for a devout Israelite, or just anyone traveling with their family, these places were a last resort.
An absolute last resort. Sometimes sleeping out on a hillside was actually safer than staying in one of these places.
So if a traveler got sick or was robbed or just ran out of water, there's no public safety net. There's no 911.
Nothing. Their immediate survival depended entirely on one thing: finding a household willing to open their door.
A household that had no obligation to them.
None at all. And it was a risk for the host, too. You're letting a stranger into your home. You don't know them. They could be carrying a disease. They could attract robbers to your own home. There's even a legal liability.
So that context makes the command radically different. It's not just be nice to visitors.
It's not. It explains why God elevates this from a simple kindness to a profound ethical necessity. He weaves it right into the social and legal fabric of the covenant community.
That brings up a really important question, though. If it was such a physical necessity, why did God even need to command it? Wouldn't a sort of, I don't know, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours mentality just develop naturally?
You'd think so. Simple human empathy. But this is where the theology of the law is so unique. God links this physical need directly to Israel's spiritual identity.
He doesn't just leave it to chance or self-interest.
No. He moves it directly into what the essay calls the mandate from experience. God commands them to remember. He tells them, do not forget your own story.
Their own helplessness as wanderers.
Exactly. They were to draw on the national memory of their time in Egypt.
Ah.
The covenant law constantly forces that historical memory into present-day action. They were Jerem sojourners, resident aliens in Egypt. They were powerless. They were dependent entirely on God's grace for their survival and their deliverance.
So now, having been welcomed by God into their own land, a land of security,
they must extend that same grace, that same welcome, to those who are now in the vulnerable position they once were.
Let's look at the specific language of the command, because it's just stunningly radical when you hear it in that context.
It is. It's crystal clear. There's no room for misinterpretation. In Leviticus 19, verse 34, God says this: "The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself."
As one born among you.
And then he gives the reason, the grounding for the command. "For you are strangers in the land of Egypt."
When I read that, I realized the law isn't just setting some minimum standard of decency. Don't rob the traveler. That's not it at all.
No.
It's demanding this radical transformational identification with the outsider. To treat the Bujer, the resident alien, as if he were your brother, your kinsman.
It means granting them full societal rights and, critically, full communal care and protection. It's a total erasure of the us versus them mentality.
And the source material points out that the law even distinguished between different kinds of strangers, didn't it?
Yes, it did. It distinguished between the Didger, who was more like a long-term resident, maybe a refugee, and the Czar, who's just a foreigner passing through. And the law had requirements for both. But the ethical pressure point, the real heart of it, was always that command to love the Bujer as yourself.
Linking it back to that core belief that every person, regardless of their origin or status, is made in the image of God.
That's the foundation. The Imago Dei. Every person deserves dignity.
So the compassion they were commanded to show wasn't just a good social policy. It was a direct reflection of their relationship with God.
Absolutely. And that highlights the ethical purpose of the whole thing. By protecting and welcoming the outsider, Israel was bearing witness. They were testifying to the unique, radically welcoming character of their God.
It was their public testimony to the surrounding nations.
It was. Their God wasn't some local, tribal deity who only cared for his own kin. Their God was the one who actively defends the weak and the marginalized.
The fatherless, the widow, and the stranger. That triad appears over and over.
It does. And so this practice of covenant mercy, of hospitality, it defined them as a people. It showed the world that the grace they had received from God was meant to be shared, even with the non-kin, the outsider. It was a visible sign of their faithfulness to the covenant.
Okay, so with that context firmly in place, hospitality moving from just a survival tactic to a spiritual mandate, let's transition. Let's look at the biblical narrative itself. The stories where God commends and blesses these acts of spontaneous generosity.
And the scriptures are just filled with these accounts. They provide the models for what philoxenia looks like in action.
We have to begin, as the essay does, with Abraham. He's called the timeless standard. This is in Genesis 18.
It's the perfect place to start. The scene is set by the terebinth trees of Mamre. It's the heat of the day, the time when most people would be resting inside. And Abraham sees 3 visitors approaching.
And what's so telling is the speed and the the sheer extravagance of his response.
Yes.
He doesn't just casually wave them over. The text is very specific. It says he ran to meet them, he bowed low to the ground, he hurried back to the tent to tell Sarah to make cakes.
And he doesn't just tell her to grab some leftovers. He says, "Quick, 3 seahs of the finest flour." This was a huge amount.
And then he runs to the herd and selects a choice, tender calf for his servant to prepare.
And we have to pause on that detail. This wasn't just a modest offering of bread and water. This was a spontaneous feast. Preparing a whole calf is a massive undertaking.
It shows his hospitality was characterized by this immediate zeal and really maximum effort. He was offering the absolute best of what he had.
To total strangers. He's prioritizing their comfort, their rest, above his own.
And this, of course, is where that famous concept is born, the idea of unwittingly entertaining angels.
Because the text reveals that these men were heavenly messengers. And one of them, profoundly, was the Lord himself.
But Abraham didn't know that when he ran to meet them.
He had no idea. His generosity wasn't based on their status. It just displayed the genuine kindness of his heart. And that very act became the immediate occasion for a divine, life-altering encounter.
And the result was just staggering. His hospitality literally opened the door to a direct divine blessing. God reaffirms the promise that he and Sarah will have a son.
Despite her age, despite the physical impossibility of it.
So the act of giving selflessly to strangers led directly to the confirmation of the covenant promise. It's such a powerful illustration of how God sees and honors this.
And right on the heels of Abraham's story, the narrative immediately shifts to his nephew, Lot. This is in Genesis 19.
And Lot is a much more complicated figure.
He is. His spiritual life was often compromised by his choice to live near Sodom. But he retained that Abrahamic instinct for hospitality. When the 2 angels enter the city, Lot sees them and insists they come under his roof.
And his insistence there was absolutely critical, wasn't it? He understood the danger of that city in a way they didn't.
He knew exactly what would happen to them if they stayed in the town square. And so he prioritized their safety, even though it would put him in direct conflict with his neighbors.
And that's the point of contrast. By bringing them under his roof, he creates this sacred space of protection for them.
Yes. And when the wicked men of the city surround the house and demand the strangers, Lot, in a desperate and, let's be honest, an ethically compromised moment, is willing to risk anything to protect his guests.
The source material really emphasizes that ancient code of hospitality.
It does. That code demanded total protection for anyone under your roof, sometimes even above the safety of the host's own family. And Lot's willingness to defend them, even though his method was terrible, it stemmed from this deep-seated commitment to that principle.
The immediate benefit was shielding the angels from harm. But the ultimate outcome of that act of care went far beyond that single night.
It really did. It secured protection for his own family and the judgment that was about to fall on the city. It's a complex story, for sure. But it shows that even in a very mixed life, aligning your actions with God's expectation for protecting strangers can bring salvation from disaster.
That simple act of providing shelter was a moment of faithfulness in a life that was often, well, unfaithful.
Exactly.
So we've seen hospitality in a context of abundance with Abraham and in a context of moral decay with Lot. Now we move into stories that focus on something else. Faith amidst scarcity.
Yes, where hospitality seems not just difficult, but impossible.
And for this, we turn to the prophets, specifically the story of the widow of Zarephath in 1 Kings 17.
The context here is just bleak. It's a national disaster. There's a severe drought and famine in the land brought on by Elijah's prophetic word. And this widow, she is at the absolute end of her resources.
She tells Elijah she has just a handful of flour and a little oil.
Just enough to make one last meal for herself and her son, and then, in her own words, we will die. She has accepted her fate.
And it's at that precise moment of utter desperation that the prophet Elijah appears and asks her for bread.
And not just bread, but for him to eat first.
It's an immensely challenging demand. It almost sounds cruel. Why would God command a starving person to give away their very last bit of food?
That's a very honest and necessary question to ask. And to answer it, we have to move past a transactional mindset and into the theology of obedience. The focus of this story isn't on the size of the gift. It's on the radical nature of her obedience.
It's a test.
It's a profound test of whether she would trust the spoken word of the Lord through his prophet over her own grim physical reality.
So her act of giving him that little bit of flour and oil was this leap of radical faith.
Her hospitality wasn't based on abundance. It wasn't based on calculation. It was based purely on a promise. And the miracle that follows is one of the most powerful stories of divine provision in the whole Bible.
The jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry.
The Lord sustained her household miraculously throughout the rest of the famine. Her act of hospitality, her open cupboard, became the very channel through which God chose to provide for her. Her generosity to a stranger became the vessel of her own unending blessing.
From there, we see a different kind of generosity, one that goes far beyond necessity or emergency. This is the story of the Shunammite woman in 2 Kings 4.
Yes, her actions are so expansive. And they're planned. They're calculated for long-term service. She sees Elisha passing through her town regularly and recognizes him as a holy man of God.
So she doesn't just offer him a meal when he happens to be there.
No, she makes a proactive long-term investment in his ministry. She convinces her husband to build a small, separate furnished room on their roof.
A dedicated guest quarter.
Exactly. With a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. Specifically so that Elisha would always have a place of rest whenever he passed through.
This was an emergency shelter. This was proactive, consistent ministry support. It shows such a deep commitment to serving the servants of God without any fanfare.
And the blessing that resulted from it was just as profound as her generosity. Her deepest, unexpressed desire was for a child. And she received the miraculous gift of a son.
And the story doesn't even end there.
No. Later, after her son dies, Elisha miraculously restores his life. And even later, after a long famine, the king restores all her land to her because of her connection to the prophet. She's just a shining example of someone who gave without seeking any repayment, and God rewarded her open-handedness exponentially.
These early examples really establish a pattern. But hospitality has to include more than just prophets or angels. It has to extend to the common, vulnerable foreigner.
And that brings us perfectly to the story of Ruth and Boaz in the book of Ruth.
Right. This gives us that specific angle of Degainia being applied to a vulnerable foreigner, Ruth the Moabite, who is gleaning in the fields after experiencing just immense tragedy.
And we have to remember her context. Moabites were historical enemies of Israel. She was a widow, a foreigner. She was at the absolute bottom of the social and economic ladder.
So Boaz's actions are especially noteworthy. He goes so far beyond the legal minimum required by the law.
So far beyond. They're defined by covenant grace. The law permitted a poor person to glean the leftovers in a field. That was the minimum.
But Boaz does more.
So much more. He provides kindness. He explicitly tells his young men not to harass her, providing protection. And then critically, he provides abundant food. He tells his workers to intentionally pull out extra sheaves of grain from the bundles and leave them for her.
He saw her vulnerability and responded not just with charity, but with protection and with honor.
He did, and that profound kindness, that hospitality, had immense redemptive consequences.
It's a thread that connects this entire history we've been reviewing directly to the ultimate story of salvation.
Because Boaz's hospitality leads not only to Ruth's personal redemption, her marriage to him, but it ultimately secures her inclusion in the lineage of the Messiah.
She becomes the great-grandmother of King David.
And an ancestor of Christ himself. Her story is this powerful testimony that welcoming the outsider, the refugee, the foreigner, it can directly shape the future of God's redemptive plan. It is not a secondary issue. It's intrinsically linked to the covenant.
This incredible thread woven through the Old Testament, it all naturally leads us to the New Testament. And here we see the ultimate example of this practice in action. We shift our focus now to Christ, the model host.
And Christ didn't just teach about hospitality, he embodied it. It was a central defining feature of his entire ministry. He was constantly providing for people, welcoming them, sharing resources with them.
He didn't wait for people to prove themselves worthy of a place at his table.
Not at all. He brought the table to them.
We think immediately of him feeding the multitudes in the wilderness, addressing their physical hunger right alongside their spiritual need.
But it was his persistent choice of dining companions that truly defined his radical embrace of philoxenia.
That was the truly scandalous part for the religious leaders of his day.
It was his defining statement. He willingly, joyfully dined with tax collectors and sinners, the social outcasts, the moral failures, the politically compromised people of his day.
He welcomed children that others would have just dismissed and pushed aside.
Yes, Christ intentionally broke down every social and religious barrier through the simple, powerful act of sharing a meal. He transformed the dinner table from a place of exclusion into a scene of radical inclusion.
And this commitment to the outsider is just cemented forever in his teachings. I'm thinking, of course, of the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Exactly. The Good Samaritan, Luke 10. It forces us to redefine who our neighbor is. It's not about kinship, it's about need. It demands radical care for the wounded stranger.
Even a stranger you are culturally conditioned to despise, like a Samaritan to a Jew.
And notice the details. The Samaritan doesn't just put a bandage on the man and go on his way.
No.
He provides sustained hospitality. He takes the man to an inn, and he pays for his long-term care. That's hospitality extending far beyond the immediate crisis.
And we see the same principle in the parable of the great banquet in Luke 14.
Yes, that parable is a direct challenge to our natural human impulse to only invite people who can repay us, people who can invite us back.
People in our social circle.
Right. But Christ says no. When you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Invite the people who have absolutely no means of returning the favor. It is just this stunning mandate that proves hospitality was, without a doubt, at the very center of his ministry and his teaching.
So we've established that this is historically necessary, it's narratively commended, it brings divine blessing. Now we have to go deeper. What are the theological implications? If hospitality is so much more than just cultural courtesy, what does it tell us about the gospel itself?
This is where the source material is consistent. Hospitality is deeply theological because, at its core, it perfectly reflects the character of God and the story of the gospel.
The whole story of salvation is one of divine hospitality.
It is. The entire gospel narrative hinges on this unbelievable fact. God welcomes the unworthy into his household. We were the strangers, we were the outsiders, we were the enemies, and yet, through Christ, we are adopted. We're brought in as sons and daughters.
So practicing hospitality isn't just a nice thing we do for others. It's a spiritual obligation to mirror the very grace that we ourselves depend on for salvation.
It is the embodiment of our redemption. Paul says it so clearly in Romans 15, verse 7. He says, "Therefore welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God."
The standard for our welcome is how Christ welcomed us.
Precisely. The manner of his welcome, unreserved, free, completely undeserved. That's the standard for our welcome of one another, and the purpose is to bring glory to God.
That implication is it's incredibly weighty. If Christ welcomed us freely, even when we were unworthy, what does it mean if we refuse to open our homes or our hearts to the stranger or the needy believer?
It means we are fundamentally obscuring the very grace that we claim to have received. Our lack of welcome becomes a living contradiction of the welcome God gave us.
We risk undermining our own testimony.
We do. We risk showing the world a distorted picture of God, one where his welcome is conditional, based on our own comfort or convenience.
Beyond just reflecting God's character, the New Testament also presents hospitality as a kind of test, a test of genuine faith.
Yes, a spiritual litmus test. This is critical. It's why the author of Hebrews gives such a direct warning in chapter 13. He says, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers."
Do not forget. It's fascinating that out of all the practical commands, this is one he specifically says we must not neglect. It gives it a unique urgency.
It does. And then he gives the reason.
Right.
For by so doing, some have unwittingly entertained angels.
He's directly referencing Abraham and Lot.
He is. He's reminding his readers that the guest we receive might carry an eternal weight, a hidden divine significance that we can't see. We are commanded to treat the anonymous person as if they were Christ himself, because we simply don't know the full story.
So the enduring principle is that we often fail to see the eternal consequence of what we consider to be small, mundane acts of kindness.
Exactly. And our faith is tested in the generosity we show to the anonymous person.
Right.
If we're only kind to people who we know will reward us or affirm us, well, that's just a worldly transaction.
But if we show kindness indiscriminately to the stranger, the person who holds no social or financial benefit for us,
it proves we're operating out of trust in God's unseen promise, not our own visible return on investment.
The essay also points out how essential this trait is for church leadership. It's not just a nice to have.
No, it's a non-negotiable. It is listed as a formal qualification for church leadership. When Paul outlines the requirements for elders and overseers, right there, alongside being sober-minded and able to teach, he lists hospitable.
That's in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1.
It is.
So does that mean an elder has to have the biggest house or throw the best parties?
No, and the source material is clear on this. It's not about luxury or real estate. It's about having the largest capacity for selfless vulnerability.
A welcoming heart.
A welcoming heart. It underscores that hospitality is an expected fruit of the Spirit's work. It's foundational for a shepherd who is fit to lead God's flock. A leader must be accessible, open, ready to care for and gather in the vulnerable. If a leader can't model this, how can they lead a church whose very existence is based on God's welcome?
And finally, this whole practice, it shifts our perspective from the here and now to the eternal. It helps us in anticipating eternity.
It does. Our earthly hospitality is meant to be a small foretaste of the eternal kingdom, because the ultimate destiny of every believer is pictured as a shared table, a feast.
Jesus constantly used that imagery.
He did. He spoke of many coming from the east and the west to sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. The definition of inclusion is being seated at the table.
The culmination of all of God's redemptive work isn't a board meeting or a lecture. It's a party. It's a celebratory, welcoming feast.
The ultimate expression of God's hospitality is the great marriage supper of the Lamb, described in Revelation. That's where all believers will dine at his table forever in perfect fellowship.
So every meal we share with a stranger, every time we offer a bed to someone in need.
It's a small, living anticipation of that final, glorious banquet. In a way, it's a rehearsal for eternity.
Okay, so we've traced this command from Abraham's tent all the way to the eternal throne room, but now we have to bring it home. We live in a world that is, in many ways, defined by high fences, by digital isolation, and by a deep cultural fear of the stranger. How do we connect this ancient life or death command to our modern context?
I think the first step, based on the source material, is that we have to redefine our goal. We have to focus on serving, not entertaining.
Serving, not entertaining. What's the difference?
The essay draws a clear line. Entertainment is often focused on the host. It's about performance. Is my house clean enough? Is the food impressive? Am I a good host?
It's about us.
It's about us. True biblical hospitality is focused entirely on the guest, on their comfort, their needs, their rest, especially the vulnerable guest.
So, practically speaking, what does this look like today? Who are the strangers and sojourners in our communities?
Well, they're the people defined by modern forms of vulnerability. It could be the newly arrived refugee family that needs help with furnishings and, more importantly, friendship.
It could be the international student who's thousands of miles from home and deeply lonely.
The single parent in your neighborhood who is just overwhelmed. The new member at your church who doesn't know a soul and feels completely isolated.
Or someone going through an acute crisis, a medical emergency, a job loss, a house fire.
Exactly. And the practical form of service today might not be a fatted calf. It might be a simple meal. It might be letting someone use your washing machine. It might be just opening the door and sharing what you have.
So the key metric isn't the luxury of the offering.
Not at all. The key metric is the sincerity of the heart and the willingness to sacrifice, to be inconvenienced for the sake of another person.
That element of sacrifice brings us back to that New Testament exhortation in 1 Peter.
Yes. Peter tells us to offer hospitality to one another without grumbling.
Without grumbling, that's the hard part.
That's the heart part. The manner of our hospitality matters just as much as the act itself. If we serve grudgingly or resentfully, or only when it's perfectly convenient, we completely negate the spiritual power of the act. We turn it back into a burden instead of a joyful reflection of grace.
It sounds like this is really about overcoming the cultural inertia of our self-protective society. What are the specific barriers that we have to intentionally push against?
The sources suggest there are at least three major ones. First is the barrier of privacy and security. Our culture prizes high fences, alarm systems, isolated living. True hospitality requires vulnerability. It means opening our private space to the unknown.
Second, the digital barrier.
The barrier of digital isolation. We connect constantly online, but we rarely share physical space. And genuine community requires shared physical space.
And then the third?
The barrier of expectation. We worry about our house being messy or not having the perfect meal prepared. We worry about liability. And that perfectionism stops us from acting at all. Biblical hospitality requires the intentionality to override these default settings of convenience and fear.
And when we do that, when we push past those barriers and practice this kind of intentional service, the sources say the benefits flow back to us in profound ways.
Yes, there are deep spiritual benefits of giving. The first one is that we learn humility.
How so?
When our guests can't reciprocate, when they are truly strangers or they are struggling, it forces us to give purely for their good. It strips away any expectation of a return invitation or social advancement.
It changes the interaction from a social transaction into a spiritual offering.
That's it, exactly. It teaches us to give without expecting any earthly return, just as God gave his Son freely to us, an unpayable debt. It transforms us from consumers into servants.
And the second benefit has to do with our trust in God.
Yes, we learn faith. We are actively practicing faith when we trust that God sees our act of selfless service and that He will be the one to reward it, even if the person we're helping cannot.
There's that proverb, whoever refreshes others will be refreshed.
That's the promise. By trusting in God's provision for us, we're freed from needing to rely on our guest for affirmation or repayment. We can rely on the host of the universe to provide.
Now, focusing on the church body, the essay reveals that hospitality isn't just about individual virtue, it's the structural glue of community.
It is absolutely central to building community and breaking down barriers. We see this so powerfully modeled in the early church. Hospitality was the essential practice that bound together Jewish and Gentile believers.
Two groups that were historically separated by profound social and religious walls.
And the shared table was the great equalizer. It was the physical demonstration that in Christ, those ancient cultural barriers had finally fallen.
The description in Acts 2 of their daily life just illustrates this perfectly.
It does. It says the first Christians broke bread in their homes with gladness and simplicity of heart. Their practice wasn't formal or structured. It was simple, heartfelt sharing of daily life.
And that daily rhythm of hospitality had this powerful effect.
It testified to the reality of the risen Christ. It fueled the explosive spread of the gospel because it showed the watching world a truly new, truly inclusive kind of community. A community willing to share everything, including their most private spaces.
In closing out this section, it's clear that this kind of intentional openness is deeply countercultural.
It remains a profound witness. Biblical hospitality requires intentionality, vulnerability, and sacrifice of our time, our energy, our resources. But it offers this tangible demonstration of God's love to unbelievers, and it strengthens the bonds within the body of Christ by fostering genuine fellowship that you simply cannot manufacture.
And this ties it all back to where we began, with the law. The issue of ownership is critical here.
It's a final, powerful reminder. Our homes, our food, our private spaces, our money, none of it is ultimately ours. It's God's. It's all been entrusted to us for His purposes.
So practicing hospitality is an act of stewardship.
It is. It acknowledges God's ownership and it directs His resources for the sake of the gospel and for the needs of others. It's a recognition that we are just temporary managers of His eternal wealth.
This deep dive has really confirmed that hospitality is so much more than a social courtesy. It's a divine command. It reflects the very heart of God, and we see it demonstrated across all of Scripture. It is, in its very essence, a living parable of the gospel.
It is. To practice hospitality is to imitate the Lord, who welcomed us when we were strangers and enemies, and who now invites us to His eternal table.
And to neglect it
is to miss a vital, visible opportunity to display the very grace that saved us. Every meal shared, every room offered, every act of generous protection given to someone in need is a powerful statement of our faith and our obedience.
And as we close, we have to return to that potent reminder from Hebrews 13. It summarizes both the history we've discussed and the eternal hope that sustains us.
The passage reads, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it."
That one sentence is both a huge encouragement and, in a way, a subtle warning. It reminds us of the hidden significance in these everyday acts of kindness.
It encourages us to be active, to be intentional, to overcome our modern fear of the stranger, because the true identity of our guests and the eternal rewards may be hidden from us.
In serving the least of these, the weary traveler, the lonely neighbor Christ promised we are serving Him directly.
And He promises that even a cup of cold water given in His name will not go unrewarded.
Which leaves us, I think, with a final provocative thought for you to consider this week. As we all anticipate that great marriage supper of the Lamb, that ultimate eternal feast of welcome, how can our home reflect the eternal banquet today? How can we intentionally rearrange our lives, even just slightly this week, to create meaningful room for the outsider?
May the Lord grant you grace and faithfulness in expending hospitality. And may you trust that in every act of selfless service and welcome, you are faithfully imitating the Lord who first welcomed you into His home and into His family. Go and be faithful in welcoming the stranger.